Good evening, everyone. Sorry. My name is Jeronimo Vasquez. I'm supervisor for District 2. I'm also vice chair of the board, so I'm here on behalf of the chair of the board to do the opening comments for tonight. First off, thank you for being here. If you're just arriving, we have more space, so please come sit further up. We do have space for folks. If you're standing, again, thank you for being here. We know that this is trying times. Our community just in general keeps having to deal with different situations, and this is a result of previous situations that we've had to deal with. And so now getting ready, this area is now in a new threat that wasn't before, right? The pipeline fire changed the calculus out here in terms of flooding in this area. And so tonight, hopefully we'll be able to explain a little bit about what that flood risk looks like, and then also provide answers to your questions about sandbags and how to get them and whatnot, and where things are appropriate and how best to set them up. So again, thank you for being here, and please be patient with us as a county and some of these the other partner institutions. We're spread thin. Our staff's been going crisis mode since April. And just like you guys are emotionally exhausted, we are as well. So please just be patient, but just know we're doing the best we can to help serve you and protect our beloved Coconino County. So with that said, thank you again, and here's Lucinda Andriani.
Thank you, Supervisor. So, well, it was today, this morning, some of you may have heard, I met earlier today with Dave Zorn from CAF, and we were talking about the meeting tonight, and Dave made a comment about how he was pretty convinced we were going to get some rain today, and I said, yeah, it looks like it. And as I drove back from the station to Public Works, I could see this very black cloud over the burn area, and I thought, okay, here we go. And it wasn't much longer before we were getting the alerts off the gauges, and we were in the midst of it. And this is going to be a tough discussion, because I always talk about these processes. I think of it as tough love. So know that we care deeply about what happens. And I personally put 5 years of 18-hour days in after Schultz. Some of you may know that we're involved in the northern end of Doney Park during that episode, that I led that mitigation effort, and I put a tremendous amount of effort into that. And a lot of people over here weren't as directly involved, because the mitigation happened above the neighborhood and in the neighborhoods over west of primarily west of the highway. But those all really heavily influenced what then happened here. And people haven't seen water in a long, long time, right? Since probably, I think, more like 2011 maybe was the last time, if then, we saw any water in Doney Park. So, but as the supervisor just pointed out, we have a total game changer, because the watershed that actually flows into this area, it's called Government Tank Watershed. The upper portion of that was very severely burned in the pipeline fire. During Schultz, the lower portion of that didn't burn super, it burned moderate to severe, but we saw some flooding, but the flow path now that got exercised today, that you saw flowing today in this area, that didn't exist in Schultz. That's a whole new flood path, and when you go back and look at these maps, you'll see that. So we ran the modeling, as the fire moved forward. We began to model what did we think was going to be the results of this impact. And then once we got the final burn severity map from the Burned Area Emergency Response Team, we then ran that model, and on June 29th, the engineers that are assigned to this area had been looking at that all along and had developed mitigation measures for the houses that had been identified at higher risk for flooding. And much like in Schultz, one of the biggest impacts is that we're going to get areas with ponding like we did last time. And you can see that in some of these areas, we're getting upwards of 4 feet of ponding. So anyway, we're going to walk through all of this tonight. And I know, some people have called and said, we've had 2 virtual meetings. We've been putting a tremendous amount of information out through the media, social media, on our website. There's a tremendous amount of information. As you came in, if you didn't get a card that has all the contact information and where you go to see the mitigation that's recommended for your parcel, they're on these boards back here, and there's going to be more put up. And we're going to have tables set up with the engineers afterward that you can go look at those. But that's what we've been doing. We've been really trying to get people to look at those and see, here's what the impact is. But I know it's hard to believe. Just like in Schultz, we went through the same exercise of people saying, well, we don't think it'll really flood. And in fact, the Bird team said it wouldn't flood beyond the highway. It would never go beyond the highway. Well, we all know the first big event we had in July 20th, 2010 went way beyond the highway, and it ended up at Moonbeam and all of that area, as some of you experienced. So as I've been driving through the area in the last week to 2 weeks, and as we started putting the bags out about 2 weeks ago, the pre-filled into the neighborhoods, I've been realizing we needed to have this meeting because a lot of people, particularly south of Silver Saddle, just north of Silver Saddle and south of Silver Saddle down to Yancey, and then even a little bit further than Yancey, aren't mitigated. And they need to be, because that's where the lake's going to get created this time. And there's, again, this burn to this government tank watershed is that what's happening. So I'm going to start bringing up some other people that are going to get into the details in terms of the logistics tonight. What we're going to do on your seat was a card, a 3x5 card with a pen. And if you have questions that are general questions, not about your specific property, but general questions, use the card to ask general questions. If you have a specific question about your property, again, the engineers will be in the back at the tables, and they can work with you specifically after the meeting, okay? So that's how the process will work. Some of you will remember this from 12 years ago. So we did a similar exercise. I see smiles. So we're going to start the agenda tonight. I think we have up next Sean. I want to show you some flood video from today, and some photographs here. Go ahead, Sean. This is at Switchback on the west side of Highway 89, just on the west side. Typical of post-wildfire flooding, lot of sediment, fair amount of debris. This is some other photographs. And this is in the Doney Park area. Doney Park is largely flat, right? So you get a lot of ponding, although Vista de Oro sees a lot of flow, and they saw a lot of flow today. Fortunately, most of those homes up there mitigated, and so they're in pretty good shape. These are some photographs of homes probably that escaped some flooding this time, but unfortunately, this is not even the modeled event. The rainfall that happened today only happened over about 20% of the watershed, and you're going to hear about more of that. So this isn't even, although the rainfall amounts were significant, the extent of the rainfall was fairly limited. So we could experience much greater flows than we saw today. There's a stack of bags in the flow path, and there's a home that was mitigated. So that, well, or not, I'm not sure there. But anyway, give you some feel for what the impacts from today. We're estimating that we had probably 10 to 15 homes with impacts to garages and maybe a couple that had impacts on the interior. So with that, next up, we're going to move to Brian Kamowski with the National Weather Service, which is a tremendous partner of ours. There you go, Brian.
All right, thank you, Lucinda. Today, our storm event showed us the face of our flood threat, okay? A good, solid face of what it's going to look like. And my job here today is just simply to put this event into perspective for you so you can assess what the risk is as we move down through this monsoon season. Okay, I was at work this morning and actually took this photograph over the San Francisco peaks as things started to get active. It was immediately apparent that today was going to be an active day. I contacted the county emergency management, gave them a heads up that this is a day we need to keep our eyes on. And indeed, it unfortunately turned out that way. What you see here is a pretty simple graphic, but it has a lot of colors, and let me walk you through what you're seeing here. What we have is an image that shows the storm total rainfall from this event. I don't know if I have. Okay. Yeah, so in the colored areas is the estimates from the radar of how much rain fell in about 1 hour today. You can see Highway 89 in white there, and then I think I've highlighted Silver Saddle, Campbell, and Copeland to kind of give you some reference points on this graphic. But what you see here highlighted in yellow is that government tank watershed, the one that feeds directly into the neighborhood here. And circled in black is where the heaviest rainfall fell today. That circle in black indicates about 1.5 inches of rainfall that fell within about 1 hour today. Superimposed on that in the thin red line is the pipeline burn scar. And you'll see that today's event put heavy rain, let's say over 1.5 inches in 1 hour, over about 30% of the burned area within that watershed, okay? So a small part of the watershed, but a very significant part of the watershed. That part which was most severely burned was impacted by this event. Rain started at about 10 a.m. this morning up on the peaks. You could probably just see it turning black over the peaks. The first flash flood warning was issued at about 10:32 this morning. Now, we've done some calculations of the radar estimated rainfall rates with this event, and they were of just over 1 inch in 15 minutes high up in that watershed. About 2 inches in 30 minutes. These are big values, okay? These are very significant rainfall rates. And almost 3 inches in 1 hour over the very highest parts of that watershed. When you compare this storm to what hit back in 2010, let's say, the first big event over the Schultz back in 2010, this storm was about half that size, at least aerially speaking, or at least by the size that was covered by it. So how many times have we measured these rainfall rates that we saw today in the gauge network that we have up there? You know, about 10 to 15 gauges over the peaks. And that 1 inch in 15 minutes, we've measured 36 times directly by the gauges. By one of the gauges has picked up that rainfall rate. The 2 inches in 30 minutes, which is very unusual, we've recorded that 5 times. The 2 inches in 60 minutes has occurred 14 times over the past 10 to 12 years. To kind of give you a feel of how common, how much risk we have from an event like this. Now, I'm going to give you some perspective. I just pulled this radar image off of our network, and it shows much of northern Arizona. I think you can see I-40 across the top and I-17 going down to Bumblebee and Black Canyon City. They're on the bottom. This is the statewide estimated rainfall from just today across the area. Our little neck of the woods was that, okay? To kind of put it into perspective, ours was actually one of the smaller events that happened over northern Arizona today. But key to this is that it happened in the worst area it possibly could, and that was high in the government tank watershed, exactly where it can cause this kind of impact. Okay, let's talk about storms next week and then through the rest of the monsoon. Tomorrow's going to be another big day. It might hit over the burn scar, it might hit over the neighborhood, it might hit over the other side of town, but we're expecting a very active and wet day tomorrow, so be prepared. Scattered activity will then continue through the weekend and through the rest of the week. We're in a moderate monsoon pattern right now, so that daily thunderstorm threat is going to continue, but tomorrow will be one of the days to keep your eyes on. And then how do things look through the rest of the monsoon season? We're still forecasting a lean toward a wetter than normal monsoon. We expect active conditions to continue. So there is a significant risk, okay, a significant risk of more storms like we saw today over the burn area this summer. All right, now the National Weather Service works very closely with the city and the county in issuing warnings when flooding is imminent, either from our Doppler radar or from the gauges. The National Weather Service uses the wireless emergency alerts to communicate our warnings. We also have the NOAA weather radio as well, and our webpage and social media. The WEAs, as they're called, will highlight and alert people within the area that we're forecasting the flash flood. Yes, sir.
I work in Sedona.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean I'm not going to get the alert when I'm down there?
Exactly, yes. A very good question is, the gentleman here was down in Sedona. Will he receive one of the alerts from the National Weather Service? Only those within the polygon who have a cell phone within that polygon of the flash flood warning will receive the alert. So if you and your phone was down in Sedona, no, you would not receive the alert. But that's where, yeah. But that's where the county comes in, because we're covering all the bases to where there's other alert systems that are phone-based, not location-based. Ours will alert people that maybe are coming from out of town, just happen to be driving through the area, their phone is within the polygon, they get alerted, okay? So there's many different layers of warning and notification technology at work here to try to give you all of the information that we can. And with that, I'll just go ahead and pass it back.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm going to grab that from you, too. Okay, I covered a little bit of this in the intro, but I just wanted to share that, and some of you certainly are well aware of this, that most of the flooding that occurred during Schultz was in the Sunset Crater Estates area. And we did see that same kind of phenomena of the ponding, right? The water would roll in and it would sit there, and a lot of times it sat there for days, people will remember. And in many cases, there were times when the fire department had to mobilize pumps and try to help pump out the water. Fairly quickly, people built moats around their homes, and you're going to see that on some of these exhibits, the recommended mitigation exhibits, where we are recommending moats, bags all the way around your home. And, you know, we saw fairly significant, there were a number of homes that were damaged because of the flooding. And again, the predictions at that time were that we would not see water beyond 89, that 89 would serve as a dam, and obviously that didn't take place. That first big event, and actually we got 1.25 inches over 15 minutes in the entire burn area, so that was a really monster event. I believe it was 2012, that we constructed 2 berms downstream of the eastern end of Campbell Avenue. So east of Highway 89, before you get to Landfill Road, they're off to the left, as if you're going to the landfill, and you go over the little hill, and you go to the flat area before you hit the landfill. And we constructed 2 fairly large berms out there, and we're going to talk more about those in a little bit, but that really had a tremendous impact on reducing down the flooding threat to Doney Park. In addition to that, we did other mitigation upstream, both on forest and off, that also had a tremendous impact on the 3 watersheds that were largely contributing to this flow, that northern flow into Doney Park, not the southern flow that happened today, but the northern flow that came in further to the north. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott Ogden. Scott is with J.E. Fuller Hydrology and Geomorphology. Since the Schultz Fire, they have done all of our flood modeling for us. They did all of Schultz. They did the slide fire down in the Oak Creek Canyon. They did museum, and they did tunnel, and now they've done pipeline. So he's going to walk through the flood modeling that's been performed and show you, and again, some of this, there's maps in the back that show it as well that you can look at afterward, but walk through that with you. I will say that this modeling is pretty eerily accurate, and we've seen that. We saw that with museum. In fact, it was, again, very eerily accurate. So you're going to see what we saw today, given the level, the extent of the rainfall. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott.
Thanks, Lucinda. Yeah, so we have, let's see here. We kind of hit the ground running, as Lucinda said, like right on the heels of the fire. We started, Lucinda pulled the trigger and said, hey, we need some models. And so we were able, one of the things that we were able to do with this effort was we were able to leverage some of the Schultz models that we had already built that were basically in the can to some extent. And we were able to use those Schultz models as a starting point and then start applying some initial burn severity data to those to change them up to reflect the fire. And then we went in and we did some post-tunnel fire modeling as well that had some other tweaks and adjustments in it that we went through. And then finally, once we got some initial pipeline burn severity information, we were able to roll those into the models. So basically, it was kind of a progression, and it was just one right after another, right after another. And it was, these models take about 24 hours to 36 hours to run. So you can imagine we've got like a stable of machines, and we're just pressing the go button on these things, and they're just churning, churning, churning. So lots of modeling. Then the initial mitigation, which is ongoing, that's going to be discussed a little bit later. After that, we talked about, Lucinda referenced that the BEAR team had gone out and actually had spent some time. We spent some time with the BEAR team out in the watershed, assessing some of the burn severity, the soils conditions, looking for what we call hydrophobic soils. For those of you that don't know what that is, it basically is the equivalent of paving the ground by creating a soil layer that won't let the water in, and basically identifying various elements out there so that we can refine and tweak these models a little bit. And then finally, after going through all of those exercises, we stepped in and did some final refinements and reflect those final burn severity numbers, of which you'll see on these maps that we have here today and what we're going to discuss. So context. Schultz Fire is, well, that just barely disappears in there. Schultz Fire is in green, so the boundary is, for Schultz is in this green area. You see on here, that's Highway 89. Doney Park is down in here. And then we had, on the heels of the Schultz Fire, we had the museum fire, which was over in a different watershed, but it was off over in this direction over here. Then we had the tunnel fire, and that tunnel fire is outlined in the purple. And you can kind of see where the limits of that fire perimeter, burn perimeter was. And then finally, the most recent pipeline fire, which extends well up into the peaks, over some repeat burn over some of the Schultz area. And the unique thing about the pipeline fire is that it got up into this part of the watershed that hadn't been burned before, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. That part of the watershed is where almost all of that part of the watershed comes down here to Government Tank, which comes into Doney Park directly. So we'll talk just a bit more about that. So there's a lot of information on this slide. I'll just try and step you through it a little bit. On the top right is a table that basically breaks down some of the estimates that we had for the high severity burn, moderate severity burn areas of the portions of those watersheds, and the acreages within the watersheds. So you see Government Tank, about 3,600 acres, and 66% of that was burned. 21% all up here in this highly red. So when I'm looking at these color coordination, the red corresponds with this, the yellows correspond with this. And so you can see this Government Tank wash, which is the primary focus that we're looking at today. Secondarily, paintbrush, the two paintbrush watersheds, but Government Tank is the big one. And you can see all of this really super red area, which is, not only is it severely burned, but it's severely steep. Okay, so imagine, if you will, going out and building a parking lot and putting it on a slope like that and pouring a bucket of water on it. You know how fast that's going to come off of there? Well, that's kind of what we're sitting here primed with now. The table here shows some comparisons, and we've got three different bar graphs in here that represent what we're calling the 2016 model. So this was a model that was prepared from the original Schultz data that basically reflects all of the improvements that were built for the Schultz Fire improvements, and it reflects a level of watershed healing, if you will, up to 2016 from the 2010 burn. So we basically started nutting down how much water would come off based on that projection of how much healing was going on in the watershed. And then the orangish, which doesn't really show up super well, but the orange is some discharge comparisons at different watersheds for the post-tunnel fire. And you can see that from the Schultz 2016 to the post-tunnel, there was a little bit of increase in a few locations, but not a lot. And the reason for that is most of the tunnel in the areas that are mostly impacted for what we're looking at here, it was just a reburn. So it didn't have the really severe impacts that the original Schultz did and what we're going to talk about now. And then comparatively, so we step into the red. These red bars are a comparison of the various peak discharge changes based on the burn from pipeline, okay? And all of these models are assuming that we have an amount of 2 inches of rainfall accumulating over the watershed in 45 minutes. So what that means is that each one of these subbasins, you can see them in here, and they're labeled, sorry if they're too small, but we've got Government Tank, Paintbrush, Siesta Paintbrush, back and forth, Upper Campbell, Rope Arabian, Copeland, Peaceful Way, Thames, Brandis, all up through there, and they correlate to these bottoms down here. But each one of those watersheds is assumed to have that full rainfall positioned over the whole watershed. Okay, so this modeling has that assumption built into it. as opposed to what we saw of the storm today, which was a very isolated part of the watershed in the upper part that received almost an equivalent amount of rainfall, but just about 30% of the watershed or less in the top end. Okay, so think about the damage you saw today, multiply that by 5 or 6. Here you go. This is what we're looking at. Okay, so I want to go over these are some results from the modeling that we have in some very targeted areas, very specific to what we're talking about here today. Just for context, Highway 89 runs right up through the middle of here. This is Campbell Avenue, and then we've got Johnson Ranch Road down here on the bottom. And if you may not be able to read these, but as far as these are a representation of flood depths. And these flood depths are depicted by a color ramp that the warmer the color, the deeper the flow. So anything less than 2/10 of a foot isn't plotted in any color. This light blue is 2/10 of a foot to a half a foot deep. And then it graduates to a half a foot to 1 foot deep, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, and anything purple is greater than 5. So you can see some of the improvements that are in here. You've got the Campbell Channel. Lucinda talked about the twins. There's the twin berms right there. There's some basins that were constructed down in this area. There's all of this ponding that occurs on the north or on the west side of Highway 89 would be just because of the elevation differential from the highway down to what's below it. And so you can see where the accumulation of water and the concentration is flowing, and the areas that are most impacted here is Government Wash. So this is that Government Wash watershed that we've been talking about. This is the thread that comes down out of that. And then we have the 2 paintbrush washes that come down through here. And they overtop, we had, the model depicts overtopping up in this area from Highway 89, and then another serious bout of overtopping down here. We saw all of these today. All those places were overtopped today. So in those storms, that overtopping has occurred, and the culverts were overwhelmed, the water came over, and the highway was shut down. The waters come, they hit the mountain here, and they tend to kind of split, and some come around this side, some come around this side, get caught behind the berms, and then what doesn't get caught behind the berms continues on around and then enters into Doney Park down here. Okay? Here's another picture that's coming downstream into Doney Park a little bit more. So you'll see that split from that hillside is coming in down through here. This is coming around the north side, and those flows coming down into the, this is coming around from the north, this is coming around from that saddle, and coming down into the neighborhood down here. Silver Saddle Road is right here. We're here at the school. And then Neptune Drive, just give you a bit of a context. And then moving from a match along here to here. So this comes here and then go down into this. We move a little bit further south into the Doney Park area. We've got Yancey Lane, Silver Saddle, the school's up here. And you can see the flood depths and the accumulation and the ponding that Lucinda was talking about in here. So there's quite a bit. We're talking about depths in this area that are somewhere on the order of, well, that's a half foot to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3. This is probably on the closer side to the 2 than the 3, but it's in that range. And just for, as a final slide to kind of give you a bit of context, we're going to switch over real quick to a quick PDF we created today based on some model stuff that we pulled out just today. And give you, what I want to do is give you a bit of a picture difference so that it gives you some context about what you've been seeing over the past few years and why this is not necessarily hasn't been a big deal. Okay, we're down here in this Doney Park area. We got Silver Saddle here, Yancey Lane, and then we've got there's two basically depictions here. This is out of that 2016 Schultz model that I was discussing earlier. Okay, so this was at the end of the 2016 period. There had been 5 to 6 years of healing on the watershed, and all of the improvements that were built when constructed with Schultz are in place and functioning and doing their job. And with all of that happening, we were looking at the idea of this amount of ponding in that really low area down there between Yancey and Silverthorne, okay? Not a lot. It's certainly less than a foot, and somewhere about a half foot to 1 foot at the worst case. Here's what we're looking at with that change up in the watershed for that government tank wash primarily. A lot more flooding. So these are comparative side-by-side photos to give you a bit of context. That, yeah, you may have been sitting out here and not seeing a drop for years and years and years. But that's why. And now we have a very changed paradigm with that watershed. And so with that, we'll switch back over, and I don't know who's next. I don't remember. Yeah, Sean's trying to get there. Oh, Mark. Give me just.
All right, super. Thank you, Scott. And I think, you know, it's a bit daunting to see that. And, you know, again, I want you to know we're here through it. We're going to be here through it. So one of the people that's been working very long hours, he and his associate, is Lizzie here? Where's Lizzie? She couldn't make it. Okay, she was out here all day. But is Mark Lamer with Remall Consulting. It's a local engineering firm that works with us, done a lot of work with us through the museum flooding and through Schultz. He used to be with Natural Channel Design, so he's very familiar with the area. And when this all hit, we identified 3 different firms that would look at the flood area, the new now Schultz pipeline flood area. And Mark and Lizzie took on the Doney Park area. So he's going to walk through now kind of what was the process that we underwent, knowing that monsoon was imminent. I mean, we had the fire and we thought, typically it doesn't start the second, third week of July. And then all of a sudden Brian said, oh no, it's coming, it's going to be here very soon. So we went through a process to get the mitigation identified and onto the web as quickly as we could. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
All right, so like Lucinda said, my name's Mark. So the maps that are right back there in the back, we put those ones together, and we put those exhibits together based on the modeling that Scott just talked about, which the modeling can be seen in the maps back there. So what you're seeing on those exhibits, right here in the middle of the room, is really what's identified for residential dwelling structures in particular, and whether or not you need sandbags, how many sandbags, and there is one home that we identified as needing barrier. These maps are color-coded. They have addresses, they have streets on them. Please use those for you to understand what your mitigation needs are. These maps are up on the website. They have been up on the county website for a couple weeks now, more than a couple weeks. So make sure you get in there and look at them. So to give you an idea of scale, Doney Park area, we identified around 400,000 sandbags needed just in the Doney Park area alone. The entire pipeline flood area, we're looking at over 1 million sandbags that are needed. So it's a tremendous amount of sandbags. County's producing 60 to 70,000 a day right now, give or take. So the point I want to make is county's constantly producing them. We're shipping them out to the neighborhoods. The pallets that are street side in the neighborhoods are there for public use, and they're going to be replenished as they get used up. So please, please, please take those sandbags and use them to mitigate your home against the flood impacts, okay? If you have questions or are wondering how to properly build a sandbag barrier for your home, that information is also up on the county's website. So when you look at these exhibits, this is really just kind of a little bit of a snippet of what you'll see in a typical exhibit. You'll want to find your home based on the streets, and then it'll tell you how many sandbags we estimate you need. And there's also colorized lines on here that'll tell you how high your sandbag stack needs to be. What is important when you do these sandbag stacks is you do it in more of a pyramid type stack. If you just stack 4 sandbags on top of each other, the water's gonna tip those over, okay? And so you really gotta make them as wide on the bottom as they are tall. So if you need 2 feet worth of sandbags, a sandbag is about 6 inches worth of height. So you need 4 sandbags to go 2 feet high. That means you gotta be 4 sandbags wide. That means you need 10 bags per lineal foot.
Just for your information, the sandbags that are being provided us, maybe about 2 inches flattened out from the ground.
Okay.
I've got the sandbags exposed, I've got my pallets, and we got some that were being filled by the hot shot crews. Hot shot crews, yeah, they're the size that you said. The sandbags that we're getting delivered, once they're on the ground flat, maybe 2 inches.
Okay. So we'll look into that. So I guess the big thing for you to realize is you want to look at the depths that are shown on those maps as well, okay? So think about that as you look at these exhibits. We have 533 homes in the Doney Park area, so make sure you get your home mitigated. We're really encouraging neighbors to help neighbors as you go through these processes, okay? Like I said, these mitigation exhibits, they've been up for a while now. There's some information on the cards that got handed out tonight as well. Please access these exhibits so you can understand what you need to do for your mitigation. With that, yes, sir. Yeah, we'll talk about that. You're really asking about the pallets being delivered on heritage and tradition.
Yeah, we'll address that in a little bit here. So, yeah, we'll address that in a little bit. We need to keep moving here. So, Alan Hayden's with Natural Channel Design, and Natural Channel Design designed all the on-forest measures, sediment reduction measures for the Schultz project, and then they've been madly running around generating opportunities, other opportunities on forest for mitigation, and very happy to say that the twin berms that I mentioned earlier were very successful today in mitigating any of that northern flow. So that was very exciting to see. And Alan and his cohort Mike, who's over there and will be back with the engineers, are engineering engineered an expansion of those twins, and that construction's underway right now. It's going to get delayed because of the flooding. It's too soft out there. But Mike's also engineered another set of berms downstream of that on the other side of landfill, and then we're also looking at berms on the southern flow as well. There we have not done work historically because that flow didn't exist during Schultz. So it's a much different process we have to go through with the Forest Service in comparison to where we've done work before. We have work before, we already have a special use permit, we already have the ability to go in and pretty much immediately do work, and they've been extremely cooperative with us, but there will be a process. We're going to take all questions at the end. Again, write them down on your cards. We're going to do that. We need to keep moving. It's very hot in here for everyone, and we want to be able to have time that people can really look at the exhibits and have your conversations with the engineers.
Thanks.
So thank you, Alan, for all you have done for many years.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm here just to kind of remind you that there was, back in Schultz, and many of you were here for all of that, and you know that lots of things got mitigated, and we utilized the forest to do a lot of that work. And a lot of alluvial fan restoration was done, which made channels through the neighborhoods possible because we slowed down the sediment coming off the hill, and you could run water through a ditch. The tunnel fire and then the pipeline fire did wreak some havoc on some of that, and I'm sure you might have heard about it. There were log rundowns that were grade control on all those alluvial fans, and those logs were burned. And immediately after the fire, the Forest Service worked with us to help us get up there, and Tiffany Construction has been working 7 days a week basically to get those things in place so that they were ready for this. They are practically done right now. Campbell Watershed has been repaired. North Paintbrush Watershed has been repaired. We have like 4 more loads of rock to go. The road got closed today. The Wapaki Trails terminal trench was repaired. Many log sills were replaced, and those things were done. And then the first flood, we cleaned off the Wapaki Trail. So those things are ongoing. Mike's been working really diligently to get designs out for expansion of the twin berms. The first twin berm was just finished up in the last couple of days, and they were midway through expanding the second twin berm, and those got utilized today. They filled up and did not pass flow downstream so far. So these are all, we've been kind of working as fast as we can to repair stuff from tunnel, and realizing that, the pipeline fire provides so much more flow and potentially so much more sediment than anything was designed for during the Schultz. We've been trying to upgrade everything as we go along. We've made good headway. We still have a little bit to go, but the forest portion where we have mitigated is in pretty good shape. The alluvial fans are the greenest places out there. The burns skipped over them. But we also need, the government tank watershed was not mitigated during Schultz. It didn't burn and it didn't flood very much. So that is still sitting there, and it can supply an awful lot of sediment. And that sediment, as some of you will remember, can change the way the water flows as it gets towards the bottom. So keep that in mind as we go through this, that flow paths can switch around. Scott's team has done a great job modeling, and those models are fabulous to work with and really insightful. But things can switch around in those areas that get piles and piles of sediment. Things can move around. We try to manage that as we go forward. We are, Also the Girls Ranch berm, which pulls flow out of Apaki and keeps it going out towards the cinders. That we've increased the height on that in the last couple of weeks. Those guys have been diligently working on that, Tiffany and KCS, and that height has been added. There's still a bit more mucking out to do, but we've increased the capacity of that to keep that flow from coming this way. So some things are working in your favor. Not everything, of course, but so that's kind of an update on what's going on as far as trying to keep up with tunnel and pipeline and upgrade things on the forest as we go forward. And as we expand into new areas, we will let you know. So, all right. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. And this is a photograph of the water behind the one of the twins. And as mentioned, these are the barriers that were installed on the southern flow downstream, and those help slow it down, but it's you know, given the volume of water we're seeing, these are called emergency measures, anything we can do to try to slow it down. So sandbag production. So we're probably at about 250. We've had some issues more recently, but a positive has been that we're working with the Department of Corrections, and we've got 60 inmates at the Winslow prison, and those sandbags that you saw come in today on pallets on the big flatbed semi-trucks, those pallets that have been coming in and getting dropped into the neighborhood, they're largely coming from that area. We've also had, whoops. All right, Sean, what did I do? So most of the current production is coming from that facility right now, and they're producing anywhere from about 7,500 to 10,000 bags a day. And then we've also had, up until about this week, we had a set of Arizona Conservation Corps crews and American Conservation Experience crews here producing sandbags as well as we've had, as someone mentioned, the DFFM fire crews. Those are also DOC inmates that fight fires. If they're not on fighting a fire, then we beg them to come here because they are just unbelievably amazing in terms of what they do in terms of both production. And for those that are elderly and disabled, where we are attempting to place bags at those houses when we have that resource, they're the ones that have been doing that. People may remember back in Schultz that we had our own Conservation Corps crews, and we brought in others from around the western United States. And fortunately, a lot of those crews, with the economy being so strong, a lot fewer youth are going into those programs. And it's been extremely difficult to get crews. And right now we're on a set. We're waiting for another set to come. But that's been a challenging process. We have reached out again, and we've been continuing this conversation. Our emergency manager, who's over here in the green shirt, Wes Deason. Wes, raise your hand. That's our emergency manager. Wes Deason has done a fabulous job. He's working directly with the state. We've made another outreach again to say we've got to increase the production of our sandbags. We have sandbags. So we're working closely with the state to get more state resources, whatever those need to look like, to try to get that production up, because we still need a significant number. Unfortunately, though, as I drove through again Saturday afternoon, and as I witnessed again today, a lot of the bags were still sitting. Now, I can guarantee you by the time we get done with this meeting, they will all be gone. So, you know, for the last couple weeks, there hasn't been, some people have mitigated, but out of those homes that I mentioned that had impacts, I don't think we saw a single one that that got impacted that had mitigation, that in terms of the prescribed mitigation. So that's why it's so critical to get out there and, let's see here. So the guidelines, and I've driven around and I do see some people who are doing it correctly. Sandbags are intended for homes. They're not intended to mitigate your property. They're intended to mitigate your home. One, we don't have the number one practice that we're trying to do, which I know is frustrating, but in fact, in a flooding like this where you have sheet flow like you do through a Doney Park area, the number one thing is to let it spread out so that it doesn't have as much impact. And so it's important to mitigate your home and let the water flow around it. It's also important because when you mitigate your property, you are then pushing water to somebody else's property, or you're pushing it to the road system, or you're pushing it to utility easements. And then there's, substantial damage that happens as a result of that. So I was at a location today, and there were some people putting it at their fence line, and I said, no, you got to move it back and put it back, closer to your home. So, and particularly, obviously, those that have to build moats. If you do have to build a moat around your house because you've got that ponding effect, make sure also that you set up your downspouts off the top of your roof outside of that prism of sandbags around your home. Otherwise, it'll fill up with water from if you have a big rainfall event right here in Doney Park, right? And this is some of the other parameters in terms of the resources that we have. And we've been doing a big push to get volunteers out. And we also ask you, if you need help with placing bags, to reach out to your friends, your family, your church group, your cohorts at work. Really try to mobilize resources because we have very limited resources. So, and again, we're trying to do the best we can. So long-term mitigation. So as Alan mentioned, for after Schultz, we invested about $30 to $40 million in long-term mitigation, and or I won't say after Schultz, it was largely during Schultz, and we got mostly between 2012 and 2015, and developed a set of measures on forest where, like he mentioned, these alluvial fans. Basically, alluvial fan is a wide spot in a river. It's a place where water will naturally, typically spread out, slow down, and drop out its sediment, and soak in as well to some extent. And the fans that have been recovered, some of you may have walked up above Campbell Avenue, the end of Campbell. We mitigated 5 of the watersheds in the area, the 2 paintbrushes, Campbell, and then you go up to Brandis and then Wupaki Trails, the Lennox. They all have these alluvial fans. Some are smaller because it's confined by the geography or topography of that area. You can't just throw a alluvial fan anywhere you want. The topography has to be naturally contouring for that, right? And then we also did some grade control to try to reduce down. That's just a mechanism to reduce sediment. And to have the sediment stay on the forest, so again, we could construct channels to direct the water through the neighborhoods, and largely the whole northern section goes out to the Cinder Lakes. So we're looking at doing very similar projects on government tank. Fortunately for us, there are some very good fans up there, very good fan opportunities. But what's happening right now, and I'm sure when Alan walks up there is tomorrow, it will have actually eroded through those fans. So not only is it not operating to reduce sediment, It's actually now contributing sediment downstream and increasing the velocity of the water as well to create even more sediment erosion downstream. So this work is extremely important. This was the game changer. The on-forest measures were the game changer for Schultz. We've had good size events out there. And people who live up, in that area will tell you, for the most part, since we constructed these measures, we've had one major flood event, and that was in 2018. We had a 1,000-year rainfall event in the Brandis Way area. And obviously, we didn't mitigate to a 1,000-year flood event and never will. But it still had a significant positive impact in that area. So we're applying to the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and we're going to be working with the Forest Service to try to secure funding as well to support these types of on-forest measures. We have very, very great opportunity. We have very strong support from both senators, both Senator Sinema and Senator Kelly, as well as Congressman O'Halloran, have been extremely supportive of all of our efforts to secure funding in the past, and will now are already supporting us with this effort. So the engineers are madly working on those measures as we speak, and you'll hear about more of those going forward. So communications. So important to understand that for this flood area, we have a flood director that's on 24 hours over a period of time. And when the rain gauges that were described earlier that are up in the government tank, we have one gauge in that area. When that gauge triggers just a small amount of water, as you see here, the first threshold is actually, the first one that actually goes off, we call it wakes up the flood director. It goes off at 0.1, just to say we've got rainfall in the area. And that person's typically monitoring the weather, again, communicating. They have a direct line with the National Weather Service. As soon as we start seeing weather, Brian's team's just amazing to work with, and they will say, hey, the next couple of days is going to be really active. And so then that flood director's monitoring the weather, they're monitoring the gauges, they're communicating directly with the Weather Service. When we get to this first threshold of 0.25, we activate really a set of observers that typically go out and start monitoring the area and for potential flooding. And that's exactly what happened today. A whole host of people went out and started monitoring, particularly in the government tank, because that was the area that was being largely impacted. And then when it hits 0.4 in the rain gauge, then when that hits, there's an actual emergency alert through the county's emergency alert system that goes out to the Timberline area. So Timberline, Fernwood, Wupaki trails. When it hits 0.75, that alert is sent to the Doney Park area. Now, all that piece is in place. Today, the radar was actually very critical because we don't have a gauge up where that rainfall hit. And we're trying to work with the Forest Service to get another gauge up higher in the burn area now. And so this relationship with the Weather Service, they actually said, based on the rainfall, they issued their warning, and then we went ahead and issued the RAVE, or the county emergency alert. If you aren't signed up for those, as was advocated for earlier, please sign up. That operates, if you're in Sedona, that will, because you sign up based on your address, your home address. And it will alert you. It doesn't matter where you are. It's alerting you based upon the phones that are connected to that address. We also send it out to a similar system as the Weather Service does, where we create that polygon for people who, again, may be visiting, may be hiking in the area, and an alert goes out through that. That's called IPAWS. And we work very closely with emergency management. They actually issue these emergency alerts on working at the direction of the flood director. So this is it. And remember, very critically, to remember that when you get that notification, it's shelter in place. Go inside your home and stay inside. And it's very important to know at all times during the monsoon season, where are your children? Because water like today, even though it doesn't seem like it may be flowing that fast in the Doney Park area, I mean, a depth of water can sweep a child away. And some of you may remember, you know, one of the worst days of my life was that July 20th. We lost a 12-year-old girl who got swept away. And obviously, we don't want to ever have that happen again. So that's why we put these systems in place. And we take this process. Today, we were all working to keep all the communications, communicating with ADOT, communicating with all the different agencies. So on the card that you received is all of these links. And this provides you with links so you can monitor the rain gauges if you want to. You can monitor, the Weather Service has a prediction system now for the burn scars in our area. We've got, the emergency notifications, of course. You should be, if you haven't received, you should be receiving the flood guide that we just issued, and we issued a letter that you should be receiving as well. And lastly, I really, really want to emphasize to get flood insurance. And you are not in a FEMA flood zone, okay? You are not in a FEMA flood zone. And so, I'm not in a FEMA flood zone, and I'm paying, I think it's $600 some odd. No, it's not cheap, but that is the only way that you can recover any funds toward damage to your home. It's the only way. Somebody said to me today, when is FEMA going to show up? FEMA will never show up. Extremely unlikely that FEMA will ever show up. They show up for catastrophic events like Katrina. Through all Schultz, we got some project money for public infrastructure out of FEMA, $1 million out of that 40 plus. But individual assistance, and even if we were to qualify, if we were to have a super catastrophic event and we qualified, the total amount you get would be $32,500. Whereas under insurance, you can claim up to $250,000. Now I know many homes are over that value, but it's $250,000. At least it's $250,000. That's all set by federal regulation. It's a national, federally operated flood insurance program. So, and you can go through that or contact your insurance agent. The insurance companies don't hold flood insurance. It all comes through the federal government. So, I really want this to work. So partnerships, we've just got a whole host of entities that we're working with, all of our consulting engineers, contractors. You'll see many local names here, partner agencies. Forest Service has been very cooperative. We're working very closely. Tomorrow we have a conversation. We're going to have a meeting with Federal Highways, talk about what's going to need to be done to address Federal Highways. So know that we're working very cooperatively to try to effectuate not only immediate mitigation measures, but longer-term mitigation as well. So with that, if you have, again, general questions, broad questions, not specific to your property, then fill out the cards, and we're going to take a set. Yeah, hold up your card. Could we get a set of folks, please, to start collecting cards? And I'm going to condense the cards down, and we'll take a set here. Shirley, can you help collect cards too, please? And Thank you. Sean, why don't you help? Let's just get the cards up here. And we're going to probably take about a half a dozen questions or so, because again, we can also rove through and answer questions in the back, particularly given how hot it is. The last thing I really want to implore you to do is to make sure you've signed up and make sure that we have your email. We're emailing about every other day or every day, some days twice a day. So if we have your email, we will keep you very well informed. And that email could become very important, you know, during certain situations. We do not sell our emails. Don't worry, it's not going anywhere. It's used for this emergency purpose. So please, please make sure you give us your emails. And you'll start getting much more frequent updates. And then the website, of course, is being constantly updated as well. So questions, bring me up some cards here and let's. Yeah, afterward, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
After the top area, the 2016 fire, it was agreed by the government head. And after that, that creek was destroyed. That creek was anywhere between 12 feet to 30 feet. And since then, since 2016, I've been really concerned about my property because I was sure that the water is gonna.
So. Right. No, and this is true. After Schultz, because there had been very limited impact to the government tank watershed, we did do mitigation within the government tank watershed because it had very little burn impact. Whereas the other watersheds were seeing tremendous amount of flooding and continuous flooding. So that's true. So in terms of the maps, if you don't see mitigation recommended on these maps and you got water today, talk to an engineer and let them know that. And I mean water like over 6 inches of water, right? If you have a home that's on grade and you're still in an area that shows very low amount of water, then make sure you take some bags and bag your entry points, okay? Bag your entry points. You probably don't need to bag all the way around, but you need to bag certainly the water's entry points. So, but again, point that out if you had more water, because we did see some different flows today. It's very hard for the LIDAR, the mapping instrument, to pick up modifications in a developed area. So,
Mapping if they're not in the.
yeah.
Beyond sandbags forever, what is the long-term mitigation?
We talked about the long-term mitigation. I think that got answered.
Or start to reseed plant trees on the watershed?
In terms of the watershed, I have not seen, we have not been provided with if there's any plan for specific mitigation beyond what we're proposing. I have heard some discussion is going on about putting some mulch on the forest, but I haven't heard anything more about that. We will follow up and get an answer to that out on the email.
Maintaining culverts along roadways and solar saddle?
So a lot of people ask about the roadside ditches. The volume of water that we're seeing, the roadside ditches are, as you saw today, are irrespective of, unless we build a true channel, are not terribly effective. And frankly, even if they fill up with sediment, aren't going to have much impact. We will do the best to go along and clear them as best we can. But in terms of mitigation, it's sandbags, sandbags, sandbags. That's going to be the most important thing.
How long for the water to reach the Rio de Flag south?
It doesn't have much further to go to get to the Rio. I mean, as you saw from these maps, because it goes south of Yancey already. So right now, they're predicting in that modeled flood that it'll take about 10 to 15 minutes to hit the top of Switchback on the west side. So today, I don't remember if anybody remembers offhand how long it took to get to the neighborhood down here, but it's very rapidly going to hit the west side.
30-day waiver?
The 30-day waiver for flood insurance. So after Schultz, we worked with Senator McCain, who introduced legislation that provided for if there is a fire that emanates on a national forest and that creates flooding downstream, that the FEMA can make the decision to waive the 30-day waiting periods. Because typically, if you go buy flood insurance, you have to wait 30 days before it becomes effective. We have not gotten a ruling yet from FEMA as to how they're going to treat this event. Historically, they have done that. But it is their decision, it's not our decisions. Obviously, we're going to advocate for that, but we do not make that decision.
Septic systems?
Septic systems. So one, take a look, make sure the caps and other things related to your septic system are in place. Interesting, through Schultz, we only had, I think, 1 or 2 septics that actually got compromised. So, but don't, keep an eye on it. If you see a mounding, because sometimes they can get full of water, they'll come right out of the ground. Just keep an eye out on it. Make sure that cap stays in place and that, you're not seeing any change or any issues with it. So.
Water going to Rio de Flag to Yancey and Stardust?
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw today that, could we see water even go further? Could we see water reach the Rio? Absolutely. In a big event, we could see water reach the Rio. So I think that flow will continue south of Yancey. It could potentially do that. No, the flooding, I mean, we would have to have very large events over all of the burn areas, the west and museum and east, to probably see an increase at this point in the Rio. But it is a very large system, so, we wouldn't expect that. I won't say it couldn't happen. You bet. All right, let's go ahead and break, and the engineers will set up the maps. Julie and others, can we get the maps over and get them spread out? Yeah, there's maps back here. I think the engineers are starting to talk with people, so thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate it. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you.
Could I have your attention real quick? Supervisor Begay is going to make a couple comments real quick.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to thank everyone for coming out this evening to be here with us. I want to thank everyone and then all the staff that are heading this meeting here. And as you know, we would like to be part of the solution from the county, so that's the reason why we're here, to help you protect your homes. And then also, sandbags are available. Please use them, because as you know, the flooding is costly to do repairs, so, and also use the guidelines and help one another. You know, if you live nearby, you know, help your neighbors. It's very important because this is something that we're all in this together. So I just want to say thank you for coming out and being here with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you all.